This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick. Starting up Chapter 1 of The Fires of Heaven, Fanning the Sparks, and our symbol is the Lion of Andor.
Now, the Lion of Andor is going to refer to both, I think, Gareth Bryn and, of course, Morghese.
Yes. This all takes place in Andor, anyway.
Right. And fanning the sparks are the sparks that create the fires of heaven. Because we know this book ends... Doesn't he kill Gabriel at the end of this book?
I believe so. Ravine is one of the first to go after Rand comes out of the waste, but I can't remember the exact order.
I do think it's interesting that this is the first chapter we get that's really more of a prologue than a chapter. I really feel like he ends up moving some of this stuff into the prologue, but it's twice or even 3 times as long as a normal chapter. It's non-main characters, and really, if you added this part to the prologue, it could be one of his large prologues, because we've already had 2 sort of non-main character POVs, and here's 2 more, and it sort of extends the beginning of the book out a little bit until we get to Chapter 3, where we actually get to the main boys and the main characters, yeah.
Long setup. The wheel of time turns, and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age, called the Third Age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind rose in the forest called the Brame Wood. The wind was not the beginning. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but it was a beginning. South and west it blew, dry, beneath a sun of molten gold. There had been no rain for long weeks in the land below, and the late summer heat grew day by day. Brown leaves come early, dotted some trees, and naked stones baked where small streams had run. In an open place where grass had vanished and only thin, withered brush held the soil with its roots, the wind began uncovering long-buried stones. They were weathered and worn, and no human eye would have recognized them for the remains of a city remembered in story, yet otherwise forgotten. Scattered villages appeared before the wind crossed the border of Andor, and fields where worried farmers trudged arid furrows. The forest had long since thinned to thickets by the time the wind swept dust down the lone street of a village called Core Springs. The springs were beginning to run low this summer. A few dogs lay panting in the swelter, and 2 shirtless boys ran, beating a stuffed bladder along the ground with sticks. Nothing else stirred, save the wind and the dust and the creaking sign above the door of the inn, red brick and thatch-roofed like every other building along the street. At 2 stories, it was the tallest and largest structure in Core Springs, a neat and orderly little town. The saddled horses hitched in front of the inn barely twitched their tails. The inn's carved sign proclaimed the good queen's justice. Blinking against the dust, Min kept an eye pressed to the crack in the shed's rough wall. She could just make out one shoulder of the guard on the shed door, but her intention was all for the inn further on. She wished the name were less ominously apt. Their judge, the local lord, had apparently arrived some time ago, but she had missed seeing him. No doubt he was hearing the farmers' charges. Admiral Nem, along with his brothers and cousins and all their wives, had seemed in favor of an immediate hanging before one of the lord's retainers happened by. She wondered what the penalty was here for burning up a man's barn, and his milk cows with it. By accident, of course, but she did not think that would count for much when it all began with trespass. Logain had gotten away in the confusion, abandoning them. He would burn him, and she did not know whether to be happy about it or not. It was he who had knocked Nem down when they were discovered just before dawn, sending the man's lantern flying into the straw. The blame was his, if anyone's. Only sometimes he had trouble watching what he said. Perhaps as well he was gone. Twisting to lean back against the wall, she wiped sweat from her brow, though it only sprang out again. The inside of the shed was stifling, but her 2 companions did not appear to notice. Swan lay stretched out on her back in a dark woolen riding dress, much like Min's, staring at the shed roof, idly tapping her chin with a straw. Coppery-skinned Leanne, willowy and tall as most men, sat cross-legged in her pale shift, working on her dress with needle and thread. They had been allowed to keep their saddlebags after they were searched for swords or axes or anything else that might help them escape. "What's the penalty for burning down a barn in Andor?" Min asked. "If we're lucky," Swan replied without moving, "a strapping in the village square. Not so lucky, it will be a flogging." "Light," Min breathed. "How can you call that luck?" Swan rolled onto her side and propped herself up on an elbow. She was a sturdy woman, short of beautiful, though beyond handsome, and looked no more than a few years older than Min, but those sharp blue eyes had a commanding presence that did not belong on a young woman awaiting trial in a backcountry shed. Sometimes, Swan was as bad as Logain about forgetting herself, maybe worse. "When a strapping is done," she said in a brook no-nonsense, do-not-be-foolish tone, "it is done, and we can be on our way. It wastes less of our time than any other penalty I can think of, considerably less than hanging, say, though I don't think it will come to that, from what I remember of Andoran law." Wheezing laughter shook Min for a moment. It was that or cry. "Time? The way we are going, we have nothing but time. I swear we have been through every village between here and Tarvalon, and found nothing, not a glimmer, not a whisper. I don't think there is any gathering, and we are on foot now. From what I overheard, Logain took the horses with him, afoot and locked in a shed awaiting the light knows what. Watch names," Swan whispered sharply, shooting a meaning glance at the rough door with the guard on the other side. "A flapping tongue can put you in the net instead of the fish."
That was a long read-in.
Yeah. It's usually like scene set, then there's a couple of characters talking, and within a paragraph or two after that, it's set up, but this was particularly long. Of course, with the wind and all that. Yeah. So the ladies are locked in a shed.
Yeah, we get a little recap of what happened, which is basically Logain. I guess they were staying in the barn, and the owner must have come in, and Logain just knocked him down on his way out.
Yeah, like hit him or something. Later we see that the farmer has a bump on his head, and Bryn kind of makes fun of him for it. Like, this is not so big of a deal.
Your wife gave you worse.
Right? I don't... That was pretty dumb of Logain. I don't know why. They could have just talked themselves out of that situation, you know. Listen, we're sorry. We're sleeping in one of your outbuildings because we don't have anywhere else to go.
Right.
That's hardly a crime. It is, but hardly.
I mean, yes, but the burning down of the barn is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, why attack the guy?
Right. Okay.
But yeah, barn burned down, and I think it also killed half a dozen cows or so. We find out later.
Well, fires will do that.
Fires happen, Colonel.
They do. And then, of course, on his way out, he went in. He went into the guy's house and stole a purse. I don't know where he got the purse. Yeah. Full of gold, but
he ran, and then it seems like all the farmers ran to the fire, and then he robbed them while they were putting the fire out, but then disappeared and just left the ladies to deal with that.
Right, and took Bella and the other two horses with him.
Logain went full murder hobo, I'm seeing on Twitch right now.
Basically, yeah, I'm gonna kill... I mean, he didn't mean to kill anybody, and he didn't mean to light the barn on fire, but he did.
Just damaged a ton of property. No humans are dead, but, you know. Questionable judgment there, Logain.
Right. But at the same time, like, they talk about how much gold the Aes Sedai throw around. Enough gold to buy that entire farm is probably not that much to sue on. It's funny that this debt gets held over them for such a long time, even after they get to Saladar, because, like, it's such an insignificant amount of gold for the Aes Sedai.
Right. Of course, she's not Aes Sedai anymore, so she doesn't have anything.
True.
But
well, yeah, I mean, right now she's a fugitive, and the only money they do have is the stuff that Logain stole when he was cheating with gambling.
I never really thought about it that way before, but it does seem a little strange that even later... Well, I guess Swan is in disguise for a long time. She can't tell anyone who she is. Or maybe she would just get someone to be able to cover the bill, you know?
And she looks like a 25-year-old, basically.
Yeah.
Or that's sort of my assumption, is that she kind of looks like she would if she had been slowed, which is 23 to 25, which is just a girl. And no one expects the Amyrlin seat to look like a 25-year-old girl.
And that's, yeah. I guess important for Egwene, too, when she's trying to run the Rebel Tower.
Yeah.
She has Swan as an advisor, but nobody knows that it's Swan.
Well, I mean, they know it's Swan. They just don't think it's... They think she's changed. Yeah.
She's not the same anymore?
Yeah. I mean, everyone in the Rebel Hall knows who Swan is. She's the former Armelin, who's, she, like, there's a whole scene where she tries to, like, take back the Armelin seat and before they raise Egwene, where she's like, well, if I've been healed and I'm Aes Sedai again, that means I'm the Armelin again. And the Hall's like, no. and they do that whole thing where they're like, well, you were Aes Sedai and then you weren't, so you have to, like, become Aes Sedai again. And that's where Lelaine goes with the green Oddjaw rather than the blue, because she's currently in the blue, but when she becomes Aes Sedai again, she goes with the green, so she can...
Leanne, yeah.
Leanne, so she can really get into the... What did I call her?
Practice the Lelaine. Practice the Demonia arts.
Of seduction, which she turns to in this chapter with Gareth Bryne.
Yeah, that's kind of the next couple pages here are like Min's observations, but they're just sitting locked in this dark shed, kind of snapping at each other for the next, like, 3 pages.
Yeah. What were you doing? No, and yeah, blaming each other.
Leanne, like, alters her dress to be a little sexier to use the short term, and takes out Min's powders and paints. They're called the makeup box, essentially, that the head cook from the tower gave her. And is, like, doing all her makeup, and they're like, why are you even bothering? Like, we don't even know what's going to happen to us. Like, we might get thrown in prison or hung at worst, like, what do you care what you look like? And Leanne tells some stories about herself.
I will say that based on the comments in Twitch, people are saying that Robert Jordan has no idea how makeup works in this scene. That it's written, like, totally unrealistically. Sort of the way that I, like, bitch about the juggling stuff. Where I'm just like, that's just not how it works. Like, no, come on. Like, do a little research there. They're like, yeah, I think makeup is having the same. Neither me or Patrick exactly are makeup people, which, again, if you're watching the Twitch stream, you can probably see.
Yep.
But yeah, this apparently is not how makeup works. One question. They say even Logain didn't know their true names. So Logain doesn't know that these are...
Who they are.
Who they are. He doesn't know it's... I was sure that he always knew it was Suan and Leanne the whole time. No, I guess not. He just thinks they're just generic serving women. I mean, I'm learning that I'm wrong. I'm not arguing.
Yeah, but I don't think that he knows, at least for the time being. They were just a way out. They were his only way out.
I mean, I know they gave those other random names, and they talk about fake names and stuff, but I was sure that Logain had been shared with... Oh, she just says, I am the woman that can get you justice, and he goes for it. So, okay. Because I was certain that it was something about, like, Aes Sedai promises, or what, But, I mean, obviously, once they get to Solidar, and everyone there is like, oh, you're Suan, he's like, oh, that's who that is.
Ah.
Yeah. But I love this party of three stilled people, channelers, and the way they found each other.
We hear Leanne talk a little bit here about her mother and, I guess, learning about the art of seduction.
Mm-hmm. Which I'm guessing is something else Robert Jordan doesn't really know that much about. But yeah, it's a fun little Leanne character development. We get to see her sort of journey from blue to green and see how she sort of makes that life change and life decision to really stop being so driven by purpose and start being driven by, loving people.
Yeah. And here we kind of see, I like this little part toward the end of that sequence, or closer to the end of that sequence. Leanne says, about time I put to use what I was taught all those years ago. Under the circumstances, I can't think of a better time or place. Swan studied her shrewdly for a moment more. That isn't the reason, not the whole reason. Out with it. And Leanne says, the whole reason? I do not know the whole reason. I only know I need something in my life to replace what is gone. And I just thought that was really powerful, and that's kind of encapsulates Leanne's whole character transformation through the series. And this is just the beginning, obviously, but...
It also makes me think of Seattle Anne from Ebu Dar, the woman who is no longer. She's the innkeeper who was a former Aes Sedai who'd been stilled.
Oh.
And so she found her purpose in running the inn, and that's how she got over being stilled and didn't go off and die. So she's proof that Aes Sedai can live pretty effectively through stilling if they find something else to drive them forward. Stilling is not the death sentence that they claim it is, unless you let it take you.
Yeah, if you kind of surrender.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of that in the book, you know. What you surrender to is what happens.
Lyanna also says, and I just really liked this part as well, I think perhaps I've always felt I was masquerading as someone else, building up a mask until it became second nature. There was serious work to be done, more serious than merchanting, and by the time I realized there was another way I could have gone, even so, I had the mask on too firmly to take off. Well, that's done now, and the mask is coming off.
Yeah, I love that scene, just when, like, because we all feel like we have that mask off. Also, the chat is telling us that part of the reason, not only to get revenge, not only did Suan bring Logain along to get revenge on the Red Ajah, but also she saw Min's viewing of glory and power around Logain's head.
Oh, right.
Which we know is him becoming the Amerlin of the Black Tower. We don't really have a name. The Mahale of the Black Tower. We can't really use Mahale because that's the name.
That just means leader, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, Taim kind of takes that as his own. I don't think Tamerlane works because Tamerlane was the ruler of both White and Black Towers. Yeah, everyone says Logain should get a bigger role in the TV show. I don't see it.
He's a great character.
Yeah.
I see why you'd want him, but there's so much other stuff happening, I could see why he might not.
Yeah, I have no desire for him to have a bigger role. I like the fact that he's the off-screen Dragon Reborn, and we sort of get to see him pop in every once in a while. You know, and his rise to power, sure, that's a nice little B story, but Logain could be almost 100% cut, and there would be no problem with that for me in the story.
You know, at the end of the kind of what I'm thinking of as the Leanne part here, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to get at this, but the women talk for a couple of paragraphs, and there's a little exchange where basically they're saying, like, so, Leanne, you're going to use your feminine wiles on this country lord, and what happens if he actually wants to sleep with you? Like, how are you actually, you know, and Leanne basically just says,
well, sometimes,
given the alternatives, what choice would you make? Yeah, I didn't really know if I wanted to touch that at all.
Yeah, well,
but I figured I might as well just bring it up and say that's there, and made me think.
There's that, and then, of course, there's the statement, the even more controversial statement from her aunt, which is, my aunt Sarah said you paid for the price and you enjoyed it, which is a little too close to the, well, if you're getting raped, just enjoy it. You know, and it's like,
okay.
Which is really not okay. You know,
No.
This is a tough thing to talk about. But at the same time, like, flirting is fun. You know it, I know it. Like, flirting, you know, especially, and like, if occasionally you go too far with that person, and you're like, ooh, oh well. Like, I don't know. It's just one of those things where you're playing a game, but it's a fun game, and if you end up sleeping with somebody that you are flirting with, is that such a terrible thing?
I feel like that's more what her aunt was saying than
right.
If this guy suddenly becomes forceful. Although that does seem like what they're talking about in this situation, so I don't know.
Yeah. So I think there's a big difference between, like, oh, they're flirting and, hey, you made these promises and all of a sudden, oops, we got in bed together, you know, like, that happens. But, oh, you're flirting, you say no, and he goes after you, that's a different story entirely. So I tend to think they're referring to the first one and not the second, but it's a tough thing to talk about. And obviously, one of the things Jordan is trying to portray is a culture that has very different norms than our current culture. Rape comes up a lot in the process of the series, and what constitutes rape and what constitutes consent. And it's surprisingly fungible in different societies.
Yeah.
Based on the norms. of that society.
Thinking that while you were talking, that not only is Watt just a totally different universe, but there's also all these different cultures that think about sex in different ways. And like I said before, I always hesitate to bring this stuff up because, as much as I might think I'm right about, and with my whatever Western values, there are lots of people who would disagree with me, and what means that. Who's to say that I'm correct, that my opinions are right on any of this? And I'm also a dude talking about women's issues here, so it's all problematic.
This is very thin ice for us right now.
In any case, as the women are discussing the finer points of this, knock comes on the door, or dude probably just swings it open because it's the guard saying the Lord will see you now.
So I think part of the purpose of Leanne's flirtatiousness is to show a contrast with Suan's sort of forcefulness, and the fact that even though Gareth Bryn is obviously very physically attracted to Leanne, right? He has this sort of automatic, autonomic response to her presence, right? It. Yeah, and she feels his pulse quicken. Like, it's not like he doesn't get, his heartbeat definitely kicks up when she's flirting, but it's Suan who captures his attention. It's the blue eyes. It's the demanding demeanor. It's the sort of defiance that he's really curious about, not the flirtatiousness. Yeah,
I think that says more about Gareth Bryn than it does about either of the women, really. Also, his last lover was Queen Morghese, who's a very powerful and forceful woman. So maybe that's just what he's into,
everyone's got a type. Everyone's got a type. But also gorgeous, right? Like,
yeah.
But yeah, no, he likes a powerful woman with a big presence, and that's what really gets him going.
We quickly move into the scene with Gareth, but this is when the guard opens the door, says, "Good, come then, step along, Lord Gareth won't be kept waiting," and that's our first hint that the Lord, this kind of backwoods country lord, is Gareth Bryn, who's a very important man in Andor. I don't think I need to get at that at all.
Well, and talk about falling into the seeds of an amazing army, right? Like, this is the best general and his 20 most experienced seconds. You put each one of them in charge of 100 men. You can have 20, times,
I really like that
men, highly trained really fast.
Grizzled, retired veterans wander off their farm when they hear Gareth might need some help hunting down a criminal, and all these old men show up with all their weapons, and they're ready to ride off to war, but they're all old men.
It's like Costco on an early Saturday morning.
That he's been collecting them, and these 3 farm girls that accidentally set fire to a barn are being hunted down by Andor's finest.
It's like if you accidentally burn down Mueller's barn. After he retired, and he was like, well, I'm done investigating Trump, so I might as well just track down these scoundrels that burned down my barn. It's like, we're not worth it. And it's like, no, you've got the top investigator in the country coming after you.
And also
because he has nothing better to do.
I feel like RJ, really makes the point that there are a bunch of old, retired career military men who have no interest in living on the farm. They just don't know what else to do. So as soon as something comes up, they're like, oh, sure, I'll be happy to lend a hand, because they don't, like I said, they don't have anything better to do except drink their pensions, which actually is RJ's words.
Which, as someone who is a post-war vet, you got to wonder how many people he watched, friends of his, drink their pensions.
Yeah. The line was something like, I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it right in front of me, but the line was something like, the only thing that they really had to do was drink their pensions and tell stories to people who didn't want to listen, or something along those lines.
Yeah, what a miserable fate.
I was like, ooh, that's real.
I've been in enough bars. I've seen that vet sitting at the end of the bar.
So our 3 women are frog marched out, and we see Gareth Bryn. I assume Swan recognizes him immediately, because that's why she stares at the floor the entire time. She's worried she'll be recognized.
Oh, yeah. Well, once she hears the name, she's like, oh my god, I totally remember that scene where I yelled at him
years ago. Yeah.
Hopefully he doesn't recognize my voice, because I haven't changed my voice. And I have to wonder if some part of him did, like, was like, that sounds like this forceful Suon person.
Right. And, I mean, Swan may not know about everything that's happened, like Bryn's falling out with Morgase. She may not understand all that. I have to assume she doesn't, because, you know, if Bryn in this scene figured out who Swan was, what would he do? Probably not turn him in. Or turn her in, rather.
What do you mean? Not
turn Swan, Leanne, and Min back to the tower.
Oh, no, I think he would have, but he certainly wouldn't have let them go off with just one guard to go work in the thing. He would have had them under lock and key, tight as hell, so they didn't go anywhere.
Till he figures out what to do, yeah.
Exactly. No, and there's a thing, a confrontation later between Gareth and Suon, where he's like, well, why didn't you tell me? And she, like, lays out her reasoning of, like, I didn't look anything like I was. Our last encounter didn't go that well. I wasn't, at the time, we didn't have this relationship. I did not trust you. Like, and he's like, well, I would have helped. And she's like, would you have, really?
Hard to say, yeah.
Hard to say.
Because then if Bryn gets caught sheltering them, it's his ass.
Or does he even care any? Like, he's been exiled from Camelin. Like, would he just
care about the physical consequences, maybe.
So basically, he turns to them and says, yeah, even though Logain is the one who did all this, they have a similar law that we do here in America, whereas if you're an accomplice in a felony, you can be charged with a full felony even if you don't do it. So, like, if you're driving a getaway car in a bank robbery, you can be charged with a bank robbery, even though you didn't technically go into the bank. And
if someone leans out of the car and shoots a cop in the face, you're liable for those crimes. You helped that guy.
Exactly. So, there's obviously similar law in Andor, which makes sense because Andor is very Americanized of all the cultures in Wheel of Time.
So we see a little bit of, like, Andoran law play out here in... It looks like the woman that runs Bryn's estates kind of reads like what they're charged with, what they're here for today, reads the charges, like I said.
I did notice in his testimony, one of the things they didn't bring up is the fact that the family was bringing out nooses when Gareth Bryn rode up.
Yeah.
And so it was definitely like, they were going to hang these girls for what they were doing. Gareth Bryn, like, saved their life.
Definitely.
Yeah. And that's part of why he wants to keep them out of that house, because he's afraid that they basically are going to get murdered if he puts them in that house to serve those folks for revenge.
Right, or at least brutalized.
Yeah. Possibly raped? I wasn't sure about that one.
It seemed like that's what Bryn was implying.
It seemed like the men were going to try and get in their pants, and the women were going to try and make their lives miserable or kill them.
And when this woman reads the charges, they are trespass, arson, or... I should say, trespass by night, arson and destruction of a building and its contents, the killing of valuable livestock, assault on the person of Admer Nem, and the theft of a purse, said to contain gold and silver. It doesn't seem so hopeful when you read all that.
No, it does seem like a long list of charges. But, in a lot of ways, the charges are like, well, it's one event. It's just like, these are all the consequences of that event.
Yeah.
No, and I don't feel bad for these folks. Their barn is not, they're bad people. They're bad people. They deserve to have their barn burned down.
They call Admer Nen to tell his story first, and then they kind of ask the question toward the women after he's done telling his story. And Leanna's the one to speak, which surprises Min.
Well, she's pulling out all the flirting stops.
Try to ingratiate herself to this country lord. And she seems to do a fairly good job, but Bryn goes around and he makes each of the women at least speak, but Swan won't say much and Min doesn't say much either. Eventually his decision in this room where, like, the families of the community are assembled, the Gareth Bryn and his assistants and the women, just like a typical looking courtroom. His decision is basically that Bryn is going to personally give these farmers the money and supplies, whatever, to rebuild this barn, replace your cattle, and we'll talk about the purse, but nobody knows what was in it, and you can't prove it, so we'll talk about that, essentially, and that the three women will come and work in his manor house, and they'll be paid at fair rates until their debt is paid, and then they can leave. Or their fair rate pay, Gareth will withhold until they're done paying off their debt. He also says that, if you really are three refugees with nowhere else to go, when the debt's done being paid off, if everything works out well until then, you can just stay.
He's being an employee.
He's clearly a kind, thoughtful man.
Yeah.
And probably the next important thing to talk about here is that Gareth asks them to swear an oath that they'll abide by this ruling, and Swan goes out of her way to pick the strongest oath she can, which is alarming to everyone else. Well, to Min, at least.
Did you notice the comment that Gareth Bryn had about Min's name? Your mother must have had a premonition.
Oh, Serenla.
Serenla, which is basically...
Old
Robert
tongue
Jordan
for
likes to... Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it? Disobedient daughter or something like that?
Stubborn daughter.
Stubborn daughter. Which I thought was just Suan having a joke at Min's expense.
Yeah, Swan picked that for her.
Yeah. It's just brilliant. Which, as the Aes Sedai, she calls everyone daughter, and you're more particularly my stubborn daughter. And then, of course, your mother must have had a premonition. Well, mother being, of course, the Amerlin seat. The mother. So I like that reference. I don't know. It's a clever little exchange that Robert Jordan threw in there. Makes me happy.
Yeah. Now that you say that, and as I think about it, Bryn says later, he brings up the name, and he's like, oh, your mother must have had a premonition. But he must know that Swan isn't her mother. First of all, she doesn't look old enough. But also, Bryn picks out quickly, he's like, you're a Domani, you're Taryn. And part of that's the names, but also he can tell by the accent, and he picks Min's accent. He says, you're from somewhere in Western Andor. So he must know that they're not actually related. He's pointing out what a strange group they are to be traveling together. How'd you guys even meet?
Yeah, he doesn't think that's her mother at all.
No.
Because he doesn't know that was named. It's just a fun coincidence. But yeah, they're all from obviously very different places and having done very different things. And which is why it's part of the reason why he's so puzzled and intrigued by the group, because it doesn't make sense. Why are they together? Right? Like, these three people from three very relatively peaceful areas shouldn't have had to come together to flee. It's one of those things that gets his brain ticking.
Bryn even points out, he's like, and you're a refugee from Western Andor? And then Min just doesn't say anything, and he just moves on. But he's like, he can tell something's weird is happening here.
Yeah. I also like the way he checks out the two girls, but then he really looks at Suan. He takes her head in his hand and looks her in the eyes and is like, what is your name, girl? Really. And so they've got just this one guard who's taking them to the manor.
Mm-hmm.
This is where we get and then sort of in that ride, we get that thing where Leanne's like, I felt his pulse racing. I was really excited. Which, by the way, Gareth Bryn is very familiar with Damani, and he's like, yeah, nice try. I've seen better.
Yeah.
It's like, you're very pretty, but you're a little out of practice. It's like you haven't been doing this your whole life, like most Damani, which doesn't make any sense. All Damani do this their whole life. He doesn't realize that, no, she's actually doing this for the first time. She may be trained, but...
Right, she hasn't lived that kind of life for years and years. She was a powerful woman.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I don't know. A politically powerful woman.
Sure, and
with money and armies. And we see Carolyn here, who's the Bryn's kind of head assistant. It seems like she's been running his estates for the years and years while he was gone, living in Camelin.
I love that Jordan likes to throw in these sort of secondary characters that have, I almost call them bureaucratic characters, like Nori in Camelin and...
Yeah, almost always. Whenever the kids particularly, or anyone really, goes to a new place, it's either like the innkeeper or usually a woman. I think in Tyr it's a man that runs like the castle, like head butler, kind of.
Right. Roof mistress.
Yeah.
And it just seems like no matter where we go, he always writes us in with a bureaucratic person who runs the city, the palace, the roof, whatever you want to call it. He really likes to have that character. It really, but it gives him a reason, I think, to talk about the basic structure of the society and what they do, and I think there's a lot of reasons to have that kind of character.
Oh yeah, it's a good cultural introduction too.
Yeah. So, but this is just another example of that kind of character. And also a reason that Gareth Bryn can just go off and, like, do his thing while his estates are being taken care of. He's not really in charge of them.
He doesn't actually run anything.
No.
He just is supposed to make the decisions.
And that's also why he's so bored.
Right. Yeah. But I wanted to point out that as they're leaving, Joni will see you safely to the manor. Carolyn said, "Do as you're told, and you will not find the life that hard." For a moment, she considered them. Dark eyes nearly as sharp as Swan's, then she nodded to herself as if satisfied, and hurried off after Bryn. And we find out later, kind of in a conversation between Bryn and Carolyn, that she's, like, putting pretty young ladies in his staff. She's been doing this for over a period of time to try to, because he's the last Bryn. And he's spent his whole life either on military campaigns or doing whatever in Morghase's court and never produced any offspring or doesn't have a wife or anything. And she really doesn't want the line to end. So she's like...
Do you think it's about the line, or do you think it's just that she doesn't want Gareth Bryn to be a lonely old man?
Probably both. I saw it as a little more calculating initially, but I'm sure she cares for him too and wants him to not be lonely.
Because I thought at this point, he, like, is never going to have a kid, no matter who he's dating.
I mean, he's not that old, is he? He's like 40, 50. He's around Swan's age, I think. Yeah, it's...
Oh, God, I hate the age discussions, but yeah, I think he's around Swan's age. I thought he was a little older than Swan. Because, like, he talks about having maybe even young enough to be my granddaughter, so he's got to be at least 60 to have a granddaughter who could be 20.
Upwards of 50? I don't know. It doesn't matter too much, but...
I see him as a much more, like, graying 60s, like... all the men around him are balding. Like, there's definitely an old... He's not a middle-aged man. He's an older man. Solid. In good shape.
Yeah.
But...
yeah, I saw him...
I thought he was significantly older than Suan, even before, slowing.
Saw him as kind of Tam Althorish. Let me see if I can pull up his date of birth or anything really quick. I'm not finding it immediately, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but... I always assumed 50s, like, Well, in any case. Girls get shuttled into the back of a cart, then they bump around for the next little while and kind of chat about what just happened. They all Swan and Leanne seem pretty pleased, and Min can't imagine why. She's like, we just signed away, like, what, 2 years of our life? 5 years of our life? Like, they're not even telling us how long this is going to take. And you guys are happy about it? And they're like, yeah, well, we're just going to leave.
We're going to break the contract. We signed a really, really good contract.
Did you?
And it's like, oh, that didn't even occur to me. Only a dark friend would break the contract. And she's like, well, I'm not really breaking it. I'm going to do it later. That's her justification. It's like,
right.
I'm not a contract breaker. I'm just a contract delayer, which is what sets up the whole relationship between her and Gareth Bryn.
Because her Swan's oath is, by the light and my hope of salvation and rebirth, I swear to serve you in whatever way you require for as long as you require, or may the Creator's face turn from me forever and darkness consume my soul. But Swan's point is that she didn't say she'd start now.
Yeah, I'll start later.
This isn't a well-written legal contract, clearly.
I didn't think we had to say that. It's amazing. It's amazing how often your politics run on assumptions and pleasantries and everyone agreeing to do the same thing. And when you just refuse to obey the rules and just go your own way no matter what, and just make up some excuse, it works sometimes. As long as you do end up paying the consequences later, as Suan finds out.
As it turns out, this is kind of a good thing that she did. Bryn hunts her down. They find the love of their lives and all that, or some comfort before they all die.
Well, Min's vision should have helped them out a little bit more.
Aradia saying, I think she could have sworn that even while bound. I think by the oath rods, I think you're right. I think
only because Aes Sedai are so damn slippery, not because, like, that's the truth. That's one of those things where it's like technically the truth, but it's not the truth.
She didn't say whenever you require. She said for however long you require.
What if that forever long is longer than your life? You have to start immediately.
I guess, yeah. I don't know. That would have to be specified. The date of something beginning has to be specified in the contract, you know?
Right.
It's like signing a check and not dating it. You have to date it.
Or a lease and being like, yeah, you can live here for as long as you want. Starting when?
I don't know. Not now.
Not now. Eventually. Like, but I need someplace to live now. I should have had that in the contract. But yeah, I mean, it's clearly Aes Sedai speak. And Gareth Bryn doesn't know he's dealing with Aes Sedai, so he's not prepared for it.
Right. He thinks assumes their stories are more or less true at this point. He's just like, they're just a couple of impoverished girls who got wrapped up in a bad situation.
Couple of boys who are up to no good. So my mom
started making trouble in my neighborhood.
There you go. Thank you.
So Cart's bouncing around. They're discussing what they're going to do and talking about leaving and the next, work until they stop watching so closely and then steal some horses and disappear. Suddenly, the cart gave a harder lurch than before, then picked up speed as if the horse were reaching for a gallop, bumping around like grain on a chafing sieve. The three women, or chaffing sieve, I think that is actually. The three women stared at one another in surprise. Then Swan levered herself up and pulled aside the canvas, hiding the driver's seat. Joni was gone. Throwing herself across the wooden seat, Swan grabbed the reins and reared back, hauling the horses to a halt. Min threw open the back curtains, searching. The road ran through a thicket here, nearly a small forest of oak and elm, pine and leatherleaf. The dust of their short dash was still settling, some of it on Joni, where he lay sprawled by the side of the hard-packed dirt road 60 paces or so back. Instinctively, Min leapt down and ran back to kneel beside the big man. He was still breathing, but his eyes were closed, and a bloody gash on the side of his head was coming up in a purple lump. Leanne pushed her aside and felt Joni's head with sure fingers. "He will live," she said crisply. "Nothing seems broken, but he will have a headache for days after he wakes." Sitting back on her heels, she folded her hands and her voice saddened. "There is nothing I can do for him in any case. Burn me, I promised myself I would not cry over it again. The question," Min swallowed and started again, "the question is, do we load him in the back of the cart and take him to the manor, or do we go?" "Light, I'm no better than Swan. We could carry him as far as the next farm," Leanne said slowly. Swan came up to them, leading the cart horse as if afraid the placid animal might bite. One glance at the man on the ground and she frowned. "He never had that falling off the cart. I don't see root or rock here to cause it." She started studying the wood around them, and a man rode out of the trees on a tall black stallion, leading 3 mares, one shaggy, and 2 hands shorter than the others. He was a tall man in a blue silk coat, with a sword at his side, his hair curling to broad shoulders, darkly handsome despite a hardening as though misfortune had marked him deeply, and he was the last man Min had expected to see.
Logain, well, he's always seems like a bad guy, but he always just does a little... He does bad things, but then redeems himself. Right? Unlike Gawain, who does bad things and fails to redeem himself ever.
And then refuses to apologize.
Right. Logain's this guy who's always he's doing things due to necessity and desperation, and then but doesn't want to, and so when he has the opportunity to do good, he does. But he's not he doesn't set out to be good. He sets out to be selfish and fails. So Logain's an interesting character. I do really like him as a character study, and the way he acts and the way he responds to things and the way he gains power and all that kind of stuff. His whole journey is really cool. Not super integral to the plot of anyone else ever.
Not really.
I mean, he helps keep the White Tower split. There's the whole thing in the Black Tower at the end, but that's mostly just him,
Yeah.
That's his story and the story of the Black Tower, but it doesn't feel necessarily... I don't feel like he plays a big role in the last battle, even though he breaks the seals, which, okay, I know is pivotal. And there's an interesting parallel there between him and Egwene, as she is the watcher of the seals, and he's the breaker of the seals. And again, you have sort of the White-Black Tower balance there with the seals, where the White Tower keeps them from breaking, and the Black Tower breaks them.
Oh, that's a good point. I never really thought of it that way. A little bit of a balance there. This is kind of his first glory moment. Is this your work? Swan demanded of him. Logain smiled as he reined in beside the cart, though there was a little amusement in it. A sling is a useful thing, Mara. You are lucky I am here. I didn't expect you to leave the village for some hours yet, and barely able to walk then. The local lord was indulgent, it seems. Abruptly, his face went even darker, and his voice was rough stone. Do you think I would leave you to your fate? Maybe I should have. You made promises to me, Mara. I want the revenge you promise. I followed you halfway to the Sea of Storms on this search, though you won't tell me what for. I've asked no questions as to how you plan to give me what you promised, but I will tell you this now. Your time is growing short. End your search soon, and deliver on your promises, or I will leave you to find your own way. You'll quickly find most villages offer small sympathy to penniless strangers. 3 pretty women alone? The sight of this, he touched the sword at his hip, has kept you safe more times than you can know. Find what you are seeking soon, Mara. He had not been so arrogant at the beginning of their journey. Then he had been humbly thankful for their help, as humbly as a man like Logain could manage anyway. It seemed that time, and lack of results, had withered his gratitude. Swan did not flinch away from his stare. I hope to, she said firmly, but if you want to go, then leave our horses and go. If you won't row, get out of the boat and swim by yourself. See how far you get with your revenge alone. Logain's big hands tightened on his reins until Min heard his knuckles crack. He shivered with emotions and strong check. I will stay a while longer, Mara, he said finally, a little while longer. For an instant, to Min's eyes, a halo flared around his head, a radiant crown of gold and blue. Swan and Leanne saw nothing, of course, though they knew what she could do.
So, I mean, obviously his glory to come is becoming the head of the Black Tower. And that's something that comes up over and over and over again. I don't know if there's a lot to discuss there, because, like...
Not really. I just thought it was a nice intro, Logain, the character, you know?
Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit about timelines here. So we know they've been traveling since the fall of the White Tower.
Right.
And the White Tower fell soon enough after Moraine sent a letter, right? Didn't she send a pigeon that never got there? Warning about Taim being freed?
Yes.
So we think the White Tower fell shortly after that letter was sent. So I'm just trying to match the timelines up to what Rand has been doing off in the Waste to what these 3 girls and Logain have been doing. They've been traveling across basically half the continent trying to find Saladar. Meanwhile, most of the Aes Sedai must have, because they've got money and they've got, boats and they can channel. They've been able to get to Saladar much quicker, and so Saladar has been establishing itself as sort of a gathering place for these Aes Sedai for a while now. So there's been this sort of period of weeks to a month or two. It's pretty tough to figure out exactly how long has gone on, where they've been traveling. Rand's been off in the Waste doing his thing.
I mean, how long is Rand in the Waste for? Yeah, I can't pin that down either. I don't know.
It's about a month. Because they go in, they go through the Portal Stone, which doesn't take any time. They spend 10 days, less than that, 9 days in Ruidian, and then they run for the Golden Bowl, which takes like another week.
Right. They wait a while.
They wait a while.
Not too long, and then start chasing the Shido.
And the Golden Bowl is basically, that's the end of the book, because that's the fight between Rand and Asmodean.
Right. I want to say that, like, Rand takes his Aiel and Moraine and leaves Tyr, and then the tower falls within days of that.
Yes. Yeah, and I think he's been in the Waste for about a month now. Now, these events might go further into the future than that. They might go into the events that happen while he's like killing Couladin and all that kind of stuff. So there's quite a bit of event. Matt's killing Couladin. There's quite a bit of events in the Waste still to come. So we'll have to maybe sync those up a little bit. But they've been traveling for a while, and they've been together for a while.
I'm looking for Bramewood on the map to see how far they got. Oh, north of Andor. Or north of Camelin, I should say.
Mm-hmm. In that sort of borderline lawless area that's above Camelin but below the Borderlands.
Right.
the area that Tarvalon inhabits.
Yeah, I wondered if Carolyn's name was for the large plain that looks like just north of Bryn's estates is the Caroline grass, where just is empty and nobody lives.
Right. Which, as we see, he is the border of a fading dynasty, right? People used to live there.
Right.
And now Bryn is the furthest house out, and his house is dying. So we're sort of seeing the retreat of civilization over time.
Oh, yeah, that's a nice way to put it. In his kind of internal monologue, we learn a little bit about, the Bryns have owned this land since the Trolloc Wars and blah, blah, blah. And it was actually a part of a kingdom that was there before Andor, but then it was absorbed into Andor after that kingdom fell. All that.
And then Andor neglected that area for a while, and it fell into disrepair, and that's what happened to the Caroline Glass. Jesus Christ. Caroline Grass. But I do think it's interesting that Salidar manages to pop up very quickly between the fall of the White Tower and the arrival of Suon. Being as they were traveling in that direction, I mean, I know they were. I guess they weren't traveling directly there either because they were searching for a gathering. So they probably were traveling in that general direction with some meandering path.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually, Aradia, I was wondering if you had any clue about that. Why does Salidar become the meeting place of the... I mean, I know it's the Blues meet there, and it's sort of the birthplace of the founder of the Blues. And I know that's why it's the meeting place. But what triggers that? Like, why is that the place where everyone goes to? Why not some other city? Or, like, how does the news get out that that's the place that people end up going to? I never really figured that one out. I wondered maybe if that was a Black Aes Sedai plot. Oh, it's the birthplace of the Blue who saved the tower from that one terrible red. Okay. Probably just because the legend is so apropos for what's going on with Elida that they want another. Basically, they need to go to the Borrowin. They need to go to the birthplace of Borrowin to save them from another terrible red because they need the birth of another Blue or amazing Amyrlin, which they get.
And it is a long way. It looks like Swan is just way behind the sisters that are, if they're already headed to found Salidar. Salidar is all the way in Altara, right?
Yeah, it's pretty far away. And I'm just curious, is she heading directly there or is she searching for the meeting?
Well, I mean, I think she's searching for the meeting, but we do hear Logain say that, you've taken us halfway to the Sea of Storms, so from Tarvalon, basically south, all the way across the continent, but not quite, a little south and a little bit west.
So I guess what's been going on is that, who knows exactly how it started, but the word was spread through the Blue network because no Blues had a safe spot. So the clue is Salidara, which sounds like someone's name, but there is no person named Salidara. There's just the town Salidar, which is the home place of Bodwin.
Yeah. After this part, Bonwin. I just kind of have the Bonwin.
You notice that, Suon never gets hurt when she's with the creator, Bella. Bella always takes care of her.
Oh, does anyone?
No, never.
That's fabulous.
Even when Egwene falls into the river, Bella just pulls her right out.
Oh, yeah.
So then we get to see that scene, sort of the post-scene analysis from Gareth's point of view.
Oh, yeah. It's like, what the hell just happened?
I was like, that was weird, but those blue eyes really got me going. So, all right, here's what I wonder. Do you think Gareth Bryn's heart rate was speeding because of Leanne, or do you think it was because of Suon, and Leanne just mistook it for her own skills?
I have the same thought. There's no way to know. And, your pulse can race for any number of reasons.
Sure. And he did say she was effective. He wasn't like, oh, yeah, I was not directed to her at all. It was like, she was very effective. But those blue eyes.
Yeah, into the other one.
I do that all the time. I'll be at a bar and someone will be like, dude, check out that girl. I'm like, yeah, but check out her friend. I like her. She's a lot cuter. I'm like, what? Really? You're into that? I'm like, yeah, that's not. I'm like, no, she's way pretty. I'm like, I don't care. Don't necessarily want the one who's the prettiest.
Different strokes.
Yeah. You know, they often talk about how oftentimes people who have interesting features are thought of as both the prettiest and ugliest people. And people who have, like, just generic pretty faces are often forgotten about. You're like, oh, that's a pretty person, but you don't, pretty much everyone can agree they're pretty, but no one remembers them.
Someone that's kind of unusual looking.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think that's true. Because I think I do that.
And I find myself much more into someone who's, like, got a little bit of a uniqueness in their face.
Tucking his leather gauntlets behind his sword belt, Gareth Bryn picked up the curl-brimmed velvet hat from his writing table. The hat was the latest fashion from Camelin. Carolyn had seen to that. He had no care for fashion, but she thought he should dress suitably for his position, and it was the silks and velvet she laid out for him in the mornings. As he set the high-crowned hat on his head, he caught sight of his shadowy reflection in one of the study windows. Fitting that it was so wavery and thin, squint as much as he would, his gray hat and gray silk coat, embroidered with silver scrolls down the sleeves and collar, looked nothing like the helmet and armor he was used to. That was over and done, and this was something to fill empty hours. That was all. "Are you certain you want to do this, Lord Gareth?" He turned from the window to where Carolyn stood, beside her writing table, across the room from his. Hers was piled with the estate account books. She had run his estates all the years he had been gone, and without doubt, she still made a better job of it than he did. "If you had set them to work for Admer Nem, as the law required," she went on, "this would be none of your affair at all. But I did not," he told her, "and would not, if I had to do it again. You know as well as I do. Nem and his male kin would be trying to corner those girls day and night, and Megan and the rest of the women would make their lives the pit of the doom. That is, if all three girls didn't accidentally fall down a well and drown." "Even Megan would not use a well," Carolyn said dryly. "Not with the weather we've been having. Still, I take your point, Lord Gareth, but they have had most of the day and night to run in any direction. You will locate them as soon by sending out word of them, if they can be found. Thad can find them." Thad was over 70, but he could still track I'm going to read this well because I thought this was good RJ prose.
Sure.
Thad was over 70, but he could still track yesterday's wind across stone by moonlight, and he had been more than happy to turn the brickyard over to his son. Yeah, it's just a good line. Yesterday's wind across stone by moonlight. "If you say so, Lord Gareth." She and Thad did not get on. "Well, when you bring them back, I can certainly use them in the house." Something in her voice, casual as it was, pricked his attention. A touch of satisfaction. Practically from the day he arrived home, Carolyn had introduced a succession of pretty maids and farm girls into the manor house, all willing and eager to help the lord forget his miseries. "They are oath-breakers, Carolyn. I fear it's the fields for them." I thought that was kind of a good intro to Gareth. Also, because we see a bit of this, his staff is trying to dress him in fashionable clothes, and he's not really interested in any of it. He can't even really run his own estates because he's been away so long doing other things for the queendom. I almost said kingdom.
It's literally like wrapping a jacket around a boulder. It's just...
Yeah, no,
okay.
It looks stupid like that.
Yeah.
Take that jacket off that rock. And we also kind of see his thoughts, which are a little bit on the dark side about himself, and that line, going back to it, that was over and done, and this was something to fill empty hours.
Well, you have to remember, he was thrown out of the palace by Morghese under compulsion from Gabriel, and she said some nasty-ass things to him to get rid of him.
Yeah.
She called him worthless, she called, and as far as he can tell, it just came out of nowhere from this woman he loved.
That is pretty shitty. Yeah.
It's really shitty. And he's really questioning his value. I mean, his entire value was in following people. That's what he did. And he followed Morghese. And she told him he's worthless. And so he's doesn't know how to deal with the person he followed, because he is such a eminently competent person, right?
Yeah, he is.
And he had incredible faith in Morghese.
He's considered one of the great commanders later, right? There are
one of the four.
Four?
Yeah, well, there are five until Pedro Nile is assassinated by Omirna.
Oh, right.
But yeah, Gareth Bryn. Well, we've gone through this before. I don't. The four captains in the last battle, who are all get the compulsion from Grendel.
We'll read a little more as I'm skimming through. Some of this is pretty good stuff. He was the lord here. He should remain here and take care of his people. He's kind of thinking, like, she's right. Why am I going to chase down these women myself? Like, who cares?
Right.
Yet Carolyn had taken better care than he knew how, all the years he was gone. He knew camps and soldiers and campaigns, and maybe a bit of how to maneuver in court intrigues. She was right. He should take off his sword and this fool hat and have Carolyn write out their descriptions, and instead, he said, keep a close eye on Admiral Nem and his kin. They'll try to cheat you as much as they can. As you say, my lord. The words were perfectly respectful. The tone told him to go teach his grandfather to shear sheep. She's like, you're an idiot. Why are you doing this?
Why do I get the expression teaching your grandmother how to suck an egg?
Is that?
I feel like that's like
from the series somewhere?
No, I think that's just from America.
No.
But basically saying the same thing of like, we've been doing this for way longer than you've been alive, and we're way better at it than you are.
Yeah, she's like, don't tell me how to not get cheated.
Right.
I've been running your household for your whole life.
Made you plenty of money, and you don't know what the hell you're doing. He's like, oh, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But he's the boss. He's got to, like, teach her to do something. It's an interesting way that the difference between the way he portrays men and women using commands, where the women will say, oh, I want you to do this thing, and the men are like, yeah, I was going to do that anyway. I'm like, I know. You better go listen to me. Whereas the reverse is true, where, like, if the men are going to go do something, the women are like, you better go do this. And he's like, I know I was going to do that. It's like, good, I'm glad I told you to do it then. Anyway.
I really like Bryn as a character, if you can't tell, so I'm going a little crazy. Chuckling to himself, he went outside. The manor house was really little more than a tremendously overgrown farmhouse. 2 rambling stories of brick and stone under a slate roof, added to again and again by generations of Bryns. House Bryn had owned this land, or it had owned them, since Andor was wrought from the wreckage of Arthur Hawkwing's empire 1,000 years before. And for all that time, it had sent its sons off to fight Andor's wars. He would fight no more wars, but it was too late for House Bryn. There had been too many wars, too many battles. He was the last of the blood. No wife, no son, no daughter. The line ended with him. All things had to end. The wheel of time turned. Just thought that was powerful.
Teaching your grandmother to suck eggs is an English language saying that refers to a person giving advice to another person in a subject with which the other person is already familiar, and probably more so than the first person. The use of the phrase suck egg for a silly person is dated back to 1609.
Whoa. I never understood what does suck an egg mean,
I mean,
is it just like supposed to be a useless thing? Like you don't suck an egg?
Yeah, I feel like maybe
it doesn't. Don't
you blow an egg if you want to so if you want to, okay, so here's if you want to get the contents of the egg out of the shell, one of the things my mom did when I was little is we used to blow eggs. So we used to I used to get a tiny little drill, and I used to put a hole in both ends. And then basically you put it up to your lips and you blow on one end, and you're actually able to blow the contents out of the base of it, and then just wash it out, and you get yourself basically an intact eggshell that you can do things like paint. We used to do that for Easter.
Oh, yeah.
So that's how, before plastic eggs were a thing, the way you used to get eggshells is you blow eggs. And so I'm wondering if maybe this suck egg refers to someone who's too stupid to blow and actually sucks on it to get the contents out, because then they get in your mouth, and that's gross.
You're probably right, Aradia. I'm sure the cultural context is missing. If this is a 400-year-old saying, a lot of times these things take on new meanings over time.
Yeah, but I like my baseless theory better, so I'm going to stick with that.
And as Bryn walks outside of the manor, there's 20 of his old grizzled veterans that live nearby that have retired to his estate somewhere.
I'm sorry, I got sucked into reading about sucking eggs. It looks like actually it's sucking eggs is just that's how they used to get stuff out of eggs. It's weird. It's weird.
So these men are assembled. I don't have too much to say about this. And as they're getting ready to go, and Bryn is having all those thoughts about, like, are we just a bunch of old men that are trying to relive our campaigns and, you know, try to not drink our pensions, give us something to do? Is that why we're doing this? See, like, yeah, no, I'm pretty sure that's actually the exact reason. And he's like having those thoughts in his head, and another guy shows up. He's like, I heard you were assembling, but also I was just out. He was like, I was in town, basically. I forget exactly where he says he was, but he was like, I was off visiting my sister, and I heard all this news that I felt like you should know
from
about.
Like a book ago.
And, and he kind of gives Bryn the rundown.
Which is a clever way of doing a little bit of a recap, by the way.
Yeah.
Chapter 1, this is, hey, oh my god, news! Guess what just happened in the last book? I mean...
The Stone of Tyr has fallen. Kalendor was drawn by some guy called Ren or something like that.
I don't know, Ren.
Word has come from Tarvalin. That's almost as big as that. There's a new Emerlin seat, Elida, who was the queen's advisor. And Swan Sanche was stilled and executed. And Bryn thinks that's really weird. He's like, they typically don't still and execute because they die in a couple of years anyway.
Right.
It's a little redundant.
Well, they're saying the execution to cover up her escape.
Strange that they would do that. Right. I just like that he picked out, like, that doesn't make sense, but whatever.
Right away. I like his little confusion where this guy says, Aielman took the stone and someone drew the sword. And he's like, and Aielman drew the sword. And he's both right and wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
He's like, an Aielman would never draw the sword.
It's true, unless that Aielman was raised in Andor.
I did also kind of enjoy that Bryn has the thought that an Aielman wouldn't pick up a sword to save his life, and he had seen that happen in the Aiel Wars.
Yeah, but like if the only weapon nearby for an Aiel to defend themselves was a sword, they will not defend themselves. Yeah, try and fight with hands and feet first. You know, I also really like the idea that Rand is the final destination of Aiel breaking the way of the leaf, because even all the other Aiel don't pick up a sword, but he does. He's the first Aielman to ever use a sword. He's completely broken the way of the leaf for his people. And you especially see that in his visions of the past, where you see this sort of descent from no weapons to just, you know, fighting with a long spear to fighting with a short spear to just sort of thinking using a sword is stupid, and then Rand picks up the sword. Generation after generation, we see them retreat from the way of peace, the way of the leaf.
He uses only half, too, so that's kind of interesting.
Sure. Yeah, it's that weird thing where Tigraine was both a Maiden of the Spear and not Aiel.
Right. I did like also that as Bryn's hearing the news about Swan Sanche, he has the thought, he had met her once. She was a woman that demanded obedience and gave no reasons. Tough as an old boot, with a tongue like a file. Like, these aren't really that flattering of compliments.
No, they did not get along the first time they met. They were definitely, like, rubbed each other the wrong way.
And a temper like that of a bear with a sore tooth.
If I remember correctly, when she thinks about that scene, she had to make him kneel. That basically he was standing in defiance against her, and she had to bring down the full weight of Tarvalin on him. And I believe some family relationship. I don't remember exactly the details there, but she was not nice to him. She had an agenda, and she couldn't tell him about it, and she abused and basically made him pay, not because he had to, but because she was keeping a secret.
I don't remember the details of the meeting. I feel like this comes up a lot more later.
It's more her thinking about it. I mean, we never see the meeting. We just see her thinking about the meeting. So it's like all these little details put together. Oh yeah, Elida and Suan work together. That's right, because she had access to him in Camelin and Suan had access to him with the White Tower, so they like basically tag teamed him. It was pretty ruthless.
He would have expected her to tear any upstart claimant limb from limb with her bare hands. It's like, I don't, that seems crazy that woman could be overthrown, but whatever.
Right, yeah, I guess she was.
And then read out Gareth and in Altima. Am I pronouncing that right, by the way?
Yeah, Altima?
Altima. Yeah. It all stank of trouble. Everyone knew the tower had secret alliances. Strings tied to thrones and powerful lords and ladies. With a new Amerlin raised in this fashion, some would surely try to test whether the Aes Sedai still watched as closely. And once this fellow in Tyr quelled any opposition, not that there was likely to be much if he really did have the stone, he would move against Ilion or Cairhien. The question was, how quickly could he move? Would forces be gathered against him or for him? He had to be the true dragon reborn, but the houses would go both ways, and the people too, and if petty squabbles broke out because of the tower... Old fool, he muttered, seeing Barham give a start. He added, not you, another old fool. None of this was his affair any longer, except to decide which way House Bryn went when the time came. Not that anyone would care, except to know whether or not to attack him. Bryn had never been a powerful house, or large. My lord? Barham glanced at the men waiting with their horses. Do you think you might need me, my lord? Without even asking where or why. He was not the only one bored with country life. Catch up to us when you have your gear together. We'll be heading south on the Four Kings Road to start. Barham saluted and dashed away, dragging his horse behind him. Climbing into his saddle, Bryn swung his arm forward without a word, and the men fell into a column of twos behind him as they headed down the oak lane. He meant to have answers. If he had to take this Mara by the scruff of her neck and shake her, he would have answers.
So just a quick follow-up on the interaction between Suan and Camelin. Basically, Suan, there's a border dispute between Murundi and Andor.
Oh,
and
I
Gareth
remember the story, yeah.
Yeah, riding out to basically stop the guy, and she was like, no, you cannot stop this guy. We want him to survive because we think he can unite this war-torn Murundi.
Right.
And then he's killed.
And Bryn was giving him shit, like, what do you mean? I'm not allowed to defend the territory of Andor? I'm just going to let them... They're like, yes. Yeah. And then the guy ends up getting shot by a shepherd, if I remember right.
Right.
Stealing sheep or something.
Tam?
Maybe. Who knows? I mean, Tam wouldn't have been a shepherd at the time. He would have been probably a military man.
Maybe. I don't know when
We always want it to be Tam, though.
This is after Suan Sanche doesn't become Amerlin until 10 years after the Blood Snow. So Tam's back. He's an Andoran farmer at that point, tending his sheep.
Oh, yeah, but this is a leader in Murundi who's uniting some of the lords there. It was Murundi, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What part? Where does Murundi border Andor? What?
South.
South, okay.
It's like... It's in between Ilion and Altara, kind of, but it's landlocked.
So, the Andoran farmer probably wasn't anyone we know. But I was trying to make some, maybe the young lord, maybe he was killed by the Black because he's a potential dragon reborn. That's the only thing I was thinking.
I don't know.
Because I don't really have a date on this.
It would certainly be a good way to sow discord if somebody wanted to kill any leaders that were able to, were charismatic enough to assemble other powerful people around them. Because the Black's whole thing kind of is to promote instability, basically.
Let the Lord of Chaos rule.
Right. Within the tower, but also everywhere. You don't want the kingdoms of men or the kingdoms of humanity getting too overly powerful and organized.
And that's why I just have a hard time believing that if Suan and Elida, basically the Light, had this plan to unite and stabilize Murundi, we're going to use this guy, and the White Tower found out about that somehow the word didn't get back out to some Black Dark Friend, Black Ajah person to set up his death like a week later. There's a reason why he died 1 week after this happened. And I don't think it's a coincidence.
There are rarely coincidences.
And I have no proof of any of that, but just based on timing, I'm going to guess that somehow, basically, the plan got out that the White Tower was going to use this man, and the Dark Tower decided they were going to kill him.
Florida and Altima.
Well, actually, I was thinking that would be a different episode.
We should congratulate Aradia on her graduation on the recording.
Yes, she's officially... Wait, are you Dr. Aradia now? No, okay. Just Master's Aradia.
Can we call you Dr. Aradia?
Bachelor of Science Aradia.
No.
What if your first name was Doctor?
Seems like cheating somehow.
Oh, trust me, I've got a BS too. It's what we're good at here, Fox and Raven Media. The BS is...
Isn't it on your wall behind you still? Is it up there?
Yeah. It's the one on the left. That's my BS right there. I have a piece of paper that says I am an expert in BS. If you didn't already know that from listening to the podcast.
I think that's a good plan, Aradia. Going to more school, if you can afford it, is totally always a good idea. But if you have a little time, take the summer. Drink on the beach, or whatever you like.
There's very few times in your life when you have absolutely zero responsibilities.
And it's, acceptable for you to not do anything, for...
Right. That, or, let's get on the Broken Earth Spoilers podcast. Come on.
Get to work.
Get to work. We've got audio content to produce.
Been thinking about trying to do some volunteering for the upcoming elections type deal. I probably won't, because when am I ever going to find time to do that? But I would love... It's an idea, just saying. I know you're a fairly politically minded person.
I mean, it's not like these are important elections this year.
All important. I mean, all elections are important elections.
If all important elections are important elections, then none of them are.
I'm Aes Sedaiing that.
I haven't eaten anything yet today. I've just had coffee, so my stomach went... Brah.
Oh gosh. That happens to me too.
Let's drown that acid with water. Aradia for president? I'm on that ticket.
I'd vote for you. Should I go ahead and break into this? It's a pretty long read-in.
I was just wondering if you wanted to talk about the show news for the after show before we really broke into the chapter.
Oh, right. So we have this fairly famous actress, the most news that's really come out about the show in quite a while.
Ever since I believe the showrunner really was the last significant bit of news.
Rosamund Pike as Moraine, who it seems like I've been getting the vibe that Rafe wants the story to be more about Moraine than the boys, or at least as much about Moraine as the boys.
Well, I think in the same vein, you could say season 1 of Game of Thrones was more about who was the father?
Ned
Stark. Whereas, obviously, the show's not about Ned Stark, necessarily. But the main character of season 1 is Ned Stark.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm pretty excited about that. It is telling, though, that the first person that they picked was the casting Moraine rather than, say, Rand or
sure,
even Matt.
And that makes sense to me because from what I've read about casting, you sort of want the boys to be younger, lesser known actors, but if you can get one or two big name actors in as sort of Gandalf, Moraine type characters. It's a long established tradition in fiction at this point, is to bring in these characters who are maybe a little more famous, like Gandalf as, the important famous actor that I should totally know.
We're terrible at this, guys, so...
Well, I'm so bad at actors. It's so outside of my wheelhouse that I really don't know. Ian McKellen, thank you. I really don't know that much, or am not really even that schooled in actors and making video and movie. Like, I'm just... No idea. It's totally... I know... I'm excited to see how they adapt it to the screen, but mostly because I know the books, not because I know how to adapt shit to the screen.
I just want more Watt content.
Yeah, nodding. But I think I didn't know her, again, because I'm totally out of the loop. I had not seen Gone Girl, which is the one she's sort of the most famous for. And then I haven't seen Jack Reacher, which she's also in. I think I'd seen her as a Bond girl back in the 90s, which is why I recognized her, but I hardly think that makes any impact on her acting talent.
Yeah, I'm definitely probably going to go watch Gone Girl now because... Well, I won't download it now, but I'm going to go watch Gone Girl now because I really want to know. And I'm just going to be thinking of Moraine the whole time.
Yeah, that's exactly that's what I did last night. I downloaded it and watched it.
In internet...
I didn't finish it, but I will.
In internet speculation, I see a lot of people saying that she seems to be really good at, like, acting with her facial expressions, not necessarily using dialogue, which seems like a really important aspect for Moraine, who's a kind of closed off from most people most of the time.
Well, and I was listening to her talk about this sort of contrast between what the character is portraying and what the character is thinking.
Yeah.
And, like, the fact that as an actress, she's already has that in mind way ahead, and that's such an important part of the Moraine character, of, like, portraying one thing while thinking another thing, and having both of those be visible in the actor is super important. And so anyway, in case you can't tell, I am over the moon excited, right? I really do think this was an excellent pick. I think that she looks just the way she looks in my head. She's an incredible name, but at the same time, not, like, too well known.
Yeah.
And it shows huge potential for the rest of the actors that they're going to bring in. That, and I've just been seeing a steady stream of, people who have worked on Game of Thrones, Stranger Things, and just some of the best television that's come out in the last 5 years. They're bringing these folks in to work on the show.
It's a good sign.
Yeah, it's a great vibe, and everyone seems to really be into the books, and I think the timing is right. And I mean, okay, here's what got me excited. All this shit aside, called my mom up and was like, "Hey, guess what? They cast Rosamund Pike to be the main character." She's like, "Oh, I know who that is. I'm gonna watch the show." Immediate buy-in. Not because of me, not because of this podcast, not because the books are amazing. But that pick got my mom to be like, "Oh, sweet, I will be watching this because it's a famous enough actor." And so from now on, I get to go around and tell people, "Oh yeah, I do a podcast about that show, and it's going to be starring Rosamund Pike, that girl from Gone Girl." And people can be like, "Oh, okay, I'm going to watch that then."
Yeah, it's kind of hard to ask people to read the series.
It's really hard.
People are like, "It's 800 pages?" And you're like, "No, that's just one of the books."
Right.
But yeah, once there's a show, that's going to open up access to tons of people.
And I have no problem with a actor not being into the books before they get cast in a role. Read the books, or read the summaries of the books, fine. Like, I really, I read your character scenes, but I don't think you have to have just know everything about the books to portray a character. I think you should know a lot about your character. But we see tons of actors play characters without reading the source material. I think you should as an actor. I think that's sort of basic research.
Yeah, I can't imagine all the Game of Thrones actors actually read all the books. Not that it mattered toward the end anyway.
Let's not go there. I don't want to yell today. I really do think that, like, now that we have a famous actress to head the show, we can tell people, "Listen, it's going to be amazing. It's got this famous actress. Go read the books before the show comes out. You have a year."
People will read the books more once they get into the show too.
Definitely. But everyone wants to have that, like, hey, I was into the books before the show came out. And this is the way to get them into it and be like, listen, the show is coming out. It's a famous actress. She has been awesome in everything she's going to do. This is going to be a major event. Get into the books beforehand.
Like I said, I've got to go watch Gone Girl now because that's what everyone brings up when she comes up.
Well, it's specifically because, also, one, that's her Academy Award-winning role, first of all, but also the ability to portray... I mean, I don't know how much spoilers you care about for Gone Girl.
Nah, I don't care.
Okay, so she portrays...
I'll still watch it.
Yeah, basically the innocent housewife, but also the psychotic killer, really well.
Both?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so there's this, she is the quote-unquote bad, she ends up being the bad guy of the series. Of the movie. And so the idea is that, like, guy comes home, his wife is missing, looks like he murdered her, they investigate him, really looks like he murdered her, and then it turns out she just disappeared to frame him because she was pissed at him for being a lazy... There's the big, basically they're psychotic and getting revenge on each other and hiding it from everybody else. And it was just these incredible overlaying plots. And so what you have is this really, really good... She planned basically a Kaiser Soze moment where it's like, oh my God, she planned the whole thing,
I did hear people saying on the internet that they would rather she had been cast as Elida or something because of the performance in Gone Girl, so she's like kind of crazed.
Yeah, I mean, I can see where you're like, but you're missing the point, right? The idea is not that she played a crazy person and you need her to play a crazy person. The idea is that she played this two-faced role where what was going on inside her head is both obvious and totally hidden at the same time, and I think that's perfect for Moraine.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?